Okay, I think we've got plenty of people, and by my clock, enough time for those that wanted to jump in to attend. So thank you everyone for coming along to this session hosted by MECLA Working Group 2 for a briefing by Anil, Sawhney, the Chair of ICMS and RICS Global Sectorial Lead for Construction. Before I crack into the nitty-gritty of the session, my name is Lucy. I want to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land that I'm coming from. I'm on Wurundjeri land today, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders attending today. I want to thank Anil for making the time to provide us a briefing coming in from the US. We really appreciate your time, and as well appreciate everyone making the time to attend this session. It's a fairly simple agenda for today. I've proposed that Anil will give us a briefing on the ICMS 3 document, and it's, I guess, the how it fits in with the work that various people in our group do. And I noted for Anil that we have a group in WG2 that is a range of designers, engineers, architects, consultants. We've got some incredibly wise and valuable members from the quantity surveyor side of things, and so we look forward to hearing that discussion today. But some of us will be newer to the space, but keen to hear some of the technical nitty-gritty and how we can apply the lessons from ICMS into design work for Australian both buildings and infrastructure projects. So that will probably take around the front half of the session, and we hope to have plenty of time for questions. So please feel free to post questions in the chat, or we can also do it as a Q&A. I will moderate the discussion for the second half of our hour. And just for anyone who's just coming in, the session is being recorded. So yeah, with that, I'll hand over for Anil to maybe introduce yourself, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Thank you, Caroline, as well. Thanks for inviting me. I know all of you are busy, so I'm really pleased to get this opportunity to share what we are doing as RICS as well as ICMS Coalition. So needless to say, I have a presentation that I'm going to be using, so we'll try and share my screen. There's one person who's trying to come into the lobby, and my screen is just showing that they're waiting. I hope that gets sorted out.
Yes, we're onto that.
Okay, so I'm going to go full screen so that all of you can see it, which then means in Teams, I may not be able to see all of you. And if there are questions, Lucy, I request you to let me know. I may not be able to monitor the chat as well. So once again, thank you to the Working Group 2 for inviting me. I'm here to share what we are doing, seek your views, get ideas, so that we can continue to enhance, increase, improve what we are doing. So I'm wearing two hats today, and very interestingly, it's August 30th, 2023 for me, and I'm presenting into the future, August 31, 2023, given our time zone difference. As Lucy mentioned, my name is Anil Sawhney. I'm the head of knowledge and practice for the construction sector at RICS. I also chair the ICMS Standard Setting Committee, which is made up of quite a few global experts, and I'll come to that as we move forward. I've kept the agenda pretty straightforward. I was asked to give a very simple introduction to ICMS, and pardon those QSs in the room who may already be quite familiar with it. Just to level set our discussion, I'm going to spend some time in the basics of ICMS also. And then I'm going to attempt to address some of the questions that you may have which will arise essentially from alignment with other standards. And what we are trying to do to make that alignment work. Hopefully that'll catch some of your questions, but hopefully it'll generate more discussion, which we will then push into our third section. I'll try and keep my presentation limited to under 20-25 minutes so that we can get more time in discussing. So with that as the agenda, let me jump into the first item, which is answering the question, what is ICMS? So ICMS is not an RICS standard. It's an international coalition standard. It's the International Cost Management Standard Coalition. The coalition was formed back in May 2015 in Washington, D.C., at the IMF. At that time, I was not living in Washington, D.C., but I've been involved in ICMS since 2015 as part of the coalition, and more importantly, as part of the standard setting committee. So the standard setting committee is the technical committee of ICMS coalition that sets the standards. It consists of independent experts. We have 27 experts who are helping build the standard, and from all parts of the world with different types of experiences and backgrounds. The main purpose of ICMS is to bring a global consistency in presenting life cycle costs and carbon emissions. ICMS, as I previously said, is a coalition standard. Each member of the coalition, there are 50 global professional bodies, all not-for-profit entities, and RICS is one of them. We sort of act as the secretariat for ICMS and provide the coordination. But these are the global professional bodies. They may not all be 50. I've not updated the list, but this gives you an idea of the kinds of organizations that are helping build this standard. I'd like to highlight AIQS and NZIQS, who have been part of this coalition from the very beginning. Simon Squire, one of the members or on the board of AIQS, is also a trustee of the ICMS coalition, and one of my favorite standard setting committee members, who is now retired, David Picken, some of you may know him, has helped build this standard also. So the contributions of all these members are very much appreciated. And I think the way it works is the coalition provides or creates a standard, then each individual member promotes it amongst their networks, their membership, and their regions. We have over 150 declared partners of ICMS. The list is available on the ICMS Coalition website that I've listed at the bottom. These are just some names randomly selected to show you the kinds of support we have in terms of adoption and implementation through these market folks. We also have significant governments and clients looking at using ICMS. Infrastructure Ontario, just across the border from me, I work closely with them. They were an early adopters of ICMS. European Commission recently they've been adopters, but they've recently now agreed to map ICMS to the levels framework, which is another sustainability framework of the European Commission. National Highways is a pledged adopter of, it used to be called Highways England. They are adopters of ICMS also. And just from, I guess, your neck of the wood in Sydney, the Global Infrastructure Hub also is a supporter of ICMS. So these are some entities that help promote ICMS. More recently, July, we had the Government of Ireland adopt ICMS in their National Development Program to essentially enable decisions to be made on a more of a total cost of ownership or a whole life cost and environmental impact basis. These are the direct quotes from the press release from the Irish government. Another couple of adoptions, Building Transparency, which is the maker of EC3, a very well-known North America-based free embodied carbon calculator, web-based, that has about 35,000 users, over 165,000 EPDs from 30 countries adopt ICMS. And alongside that, Autodesk also now incorporates ICMS into their Autodesk Construction Cloud takeoff tool. So ICMS third edition was launched in November 2021. It's open source, freely available. It's mandatory for members who are a part of RICS through our cost prediction professional statement. So ICMS third edition is now sort of regulated for our members and is being used. ICMS is available in several languages. We have an Italian, Chinese, Japanese. The Spanish version is only second edition, which has been superseded by the third edition. So truly only three, but hopefully Spanish volunteers will also bring that up. We also produced the ICMS Explained Guide, which provides a more detailed user guide for the use of ICMS. We provide training programs through RICS, and perhaps I noticed AIQS has some training programs on embodied carbon. So ICMS training is available to our members and non-members also through our online academy. So ICMS really is a high-level taxonomy and format which can be used for classifying, defining, recording, analyzing, and presenting in an integrated fashion life cycle costs and carbon emissions associated with several types of built assets. So what we do is we adopt a high-level taxonomy called ACROM, across which we then have users present dollars or cost, life cycle cost, and carbon emissions. ACROM is the major taxonomy. It stands for acquisition, construction, renewal, operation, maintenance, and end of life. Alongside the taxonomy, we also have what we call project and asset attributes and values, largely cost and schedule defining, but now also life cycle and carbon emission defining project attributes and values. And we have an integrated framework that sort of allows users to report in the same taxonomy, same hierarchy, life cycle costs and carbon emissions. So that's sort of a very high level description of what ICMS is. If we go a little bit deeper and into the history of ICMS, the first edition of ICMS was released in Vancouver, Canada in 2017, and primarily only provided a taxonomy for capital or construction cost. Then right immediately after that, through the industry requests and suggestions, we released the second edition of ICMS in 2019, which incorporated life cycle costs. And then immediately work began on the third edition, which was released in 2021, and that now integrates costs and carbon emissions together in one taxonomy. So we saw sort of an inflection point. I'm a construction guy. I would not like to freely share costs with anyone who walks through the door. So it was an uphill climb, really adoption and implementation. But ever since we have integrated carbon emissions, it's more become a pull, and we are getting lots of software vendors and other adopters interested in using ICMS, since it's important to make carbon visible, really, and you need a reporting taxonomy that does that. We have 19 entities that are part of ICMS, and this list keeps on growing. So we receive requests from our users. The one that we are considering right now is transmission projects. So we may add that. The buildings is our first entity or project type, and we have 18 other civil engineering, horizontal infrastructure project types also included within ICMS. So we provide detailed information about each one of those entity types within ICMS. And buildings, you seemingly is one, but actually it encapsulates and captures much more than that. You can have a passenger side airport terminal as a building. You can have a station, a ferry terminal, a residential office, commercial, shopping center, school, hospital, all kinds of other building types also are included in ICMS. And we also have new builds, major adaptation, and temporary buildings incorporated into ICMS third edition. And we allow the use of projects and sub-projects within ICMS. So if you had a complex project, a major development, a portfolio, or a program, you can use this idea of sub-projects. I try to explain this. Maybe I don't know how much sense it makes, but you may have a transportation network that has a building, a road network, a rail network, a bridge, or a tunnel. You can create those as sub-projects. So any large or complex development can be subdivided for cost and carbon emission reporting into sub-projects. And each you can decide where project attributes and values reside, but generally they should reside at the sub-project level so that for benchmarking purposes and comparison purposes, these sub-projects can also be pulled into a database. So project can have multiple sub-projects, and it's pretty straightforward mechanism or model for making that happen. Very briefly, project attributes and values. We have a very long list of attributes and values. They are entity specific. So for buildings, we have a different set of attributes and values. And then for the 18 infrastructure project types, entity types, we have some entity specific attributes and values. And I'll sort of come to that later when we talk about functional units or project quantities, because that's going to be useful or important when you start mapping ICMS to other standards. So construction price level, program, carbon emission related, life cycle cost related attributes and values are reported. So the classification or the taxonomy, as I said, is high level and it's very simple. So at level 1, we have projects and sub-projects. And sub-projects are obviously optional. Level 2, level 3, so level 1, level 2, level 3 are mandatory when you are using ICMS reporting. Level 2 is categories for both cost and carbon. Level 3 is called groups for both cost and carbon. And then below that, we have level 4 or subgroups for cost and carbon. These we provide level 4 as illustrative examples of what level 4 can look like, but that by design, we have left level 4 discretionary so that you can then map it, connect it to any type of detailed classification system that you may use for your projects, for your region, for your jurisdiction. So this is where international or global to local connection is made as well. So if you look at it in a detailed fashion, we borrow this hierarchy really from 15686, which is the ISO lifecycle costing standard, part 5, where we really look at Chrome classification. Those are our categories of construction costs and carbon emissions, renewal costs and carbon emissions, operation costs and carbon emissions, maintenance costs and carbon emissions, and then end-of-life carbon emissions. That together comes as life cycle costs and carbon emissions. We do not currently consider in ICMS whole life cycle costs and carbon emissions, and that's where a slight disconnect or misalignment comes in, which I will explain later. And acquisition costs, which are generally for infra projects, are treated within 15686 under non-construction costs and carbon emissions. So we include that, which again sort of is a slight, and that's why we have this broken line box explaining this ACROM Below this is our reporting groups and reporting subgroups. More detailed hierarchy, level 3, if you look at here, within acquisition, we have a further breakdown of site acquisition and other administrative, finance, legal, and marketing expenses. Then the construction, renewal, and maintenance borrow or have the same further level 3 breakdown, which begins demolition, site preparation, substructure, structure, and so on. The operation costs, I think I'm getting a little bit of a feedback. And for operation costs, we have cleaning, utilities, waste management, security, and others broken here. And obviously for end of life, we have a separate breakdown at level 3, our cost groups. Below these sit a very detailed level 4, which are, as I said, for illustrative purposes, for regions, countries, jurisdictions where there is no standard classification. Folks are using the ICMS level 4, but for places where you have a very detailed classification system, you can replace that and map it into ICMS. So that's sort of the level 3 breakdown. The design philosophy that we have used is level 4. We have kept discretionary so that you can map it. You can use our level 4 if you want to, or you can map to your elemental classification system, such as Uniclass. You can map it to a discipline or trade-based classification system, such as master format, very, not, I wouldn't say very, but popular in the US and Canada. And any other classification system, maybe for a horizontal project that you use, such as work breakdown structure, work packages, and so on. So that's where the mapping to a local, regional, national classification comes in. This is a sample report that is out of the ICMS Explain guide. You can use that guide to follow along what this really is. This is a sample for an office project in London, where we have 2 alternatives being compared, and we are only looking at life cycle costs in this example. So these are the breakdowns that you saw I shared with you earlier. You can do a similar report for ICMS for carbon emissions also. So this is the top level report for a sample project from a UK planning application in 2020, where the summary essentially provides carbon emissions summed up from groups and subgroups that lie below this. And one of the things that I should have mentioned in that detailed hierarchy, the green boxes are the ones where we require carbon emissions reporting. So essentially, ICMS can be used as a benchmarking database where you can use it for early cost and carbon advice, make investment decisions, and a whole host of other things, including benchmarking life cycle costs and carbon emissions at the entity level, and hopefully at the level 3, level 4 also. So that was sort of a very quick introduction, and I'm mindful that I did not live up to my promise. I may have taken more time than I should have for the introductory bit, but I'm going to jump into the next section, which talks about alignment with other standards. Lucy, unless there is something else that I'm not seeing, I'm going to jump into the next section.
Please do. That's great.
Okay, so essentially, once you have a standard, one of the issues that we face is that we don't need new standards. We need to map our existing standards. And I think I agree with that general statement. So it's very important, therefore, we start looking at mapping these and aligning various standards. But the challenge really is, and we are seeing it firsthand since we are now, RICS is going to be releasing the whole life carbon assessment second edition in a matter of 10, 12, 15 days. And we're seeing it firsthand because carbon experts think differently, cost planners think differently, and ICMS tries to bring both of them together. And you can see some slight misalignment. Cost planners are going to think around the life cycle of the asset. In carbon, it's very crucial to also look at the product life cycle or the component life cycle or the element life cycle, which is where the modules come into play from various ISO standards. So what we are trying to do is try and map these two subdomains and bring some semblance. One of the misalignments that clearly popped up when we were doing the WLCA is ICMS calls this life cycle cost, whereas whole life carbon has a slightly different verbiage usage within the carbon experts domains. In costs, what is externalities, income, and other things are not part of the life cycle carbon. It's called whole life carbon. So there's a little bit of a misalignment there as well. So when we started doing the alignment, we looked at the basic 21931 or the modules that are used today to sort of bring some connection with ICMS to embodied carbon, operational carbon, and user carbon. This is sort of what we you base our alignment off of. And you will notice that even the recently released PAS 2080 uses capital carbon rather than embodied carbon as a terminology. So I think these slight issues remain, but we all have a better understanding of what these are. So currently, this is the alignment of ICMS to 15978. Broadly, modules A sit under construction. Really, A0 should be connected to A1 because of ICMS, because that's where the acquisition carbon emissions for us are located. And then you can see through those color bands how we have mapped ICMS to the 15978 or 21931 modules that are very commonly used by carbon experts. This is a more detailed mapping of ICMS to 15978 and PAS 2080. You will notice that on the top we have our achrome categories, and we have mapped them to the various modules within the 15978 structure. So we will notice that the operational carbon emissions stem from B6, B7, B8. B9, obviously, we do not account for within ICMS, which is the user carbon. And I think most frameworks do not, it's reported separately rather than in an integrated fashion. So the next challenge really is to come up with functional equivalents of what we call project quantities or functional units in order to be able to provide guidance to maybe cost planners, quantity surveyors as to how to report at various levels of project development, various quantities that may be needed for carbon emissions calculations. So we use the idea of functional equivalent from the EN 17472, which is essentially for sustainability for infrastructure projects, the standard, where they define functional equivalent as minimum description of object of assessment. So using sort of that as a guidance, we are in the process of developing project quantities and functional units. Obviously, at the project or the asset and sub-project level, it's pretty straightforward. It's already available in ICMS. It may be road lane length, or there can be the IPMS floor area calculation, or any such project quantity, as we call it, which is pretty straightforward. So in the early design stages, those project quantities of functional units are used. In the process of building this within ICMS, so when we go to level 2, at the Chrome level, it seems the same project quantities more or less may make sense. So, for example, construction cost or construction carbon emissions could possibly be reported at the same project quantity as a functional unit. Now, below that is where we are in the process of giving guidance as to what these functional units should be for demolition. Should it be square meter of site area and so on? So, and that will go from entity to entity. It may vary. So we are in the currently in the process of coming up with that guidance for project quantities and functional units. So essentially what we are trying to do is, which is the work that's ongoing at the project level, excuse me, it will be the project quantity. And it seems like at the category level also, it could be the project quantity, but below that, at the assemblies or the groups level, what kind of functional unit do we provide within ICMS? And then within the subgroup level, which is essentially the product or material level, what kind of functional units do we provide? So that's where we are at in that respect. So essentially what we are trying to do is within the whole life carbon assessment second edition, the reporting framework of ICMS is your left-hand side columns. And then so the reporting categories from ICMS are in your column 1, column 2, the ICMS code. We are going to provide functional units or quantities next to that, and then you will have your various modules reported. And then that's one way to look at the data. And then obviously you can flip that and you can have another way to look at the data. That was the ICMS report that I shared with you earlier, the summary report. ICMS, we are sort of trying to align with various other frameworks. Some of these frameworks are very high level, but there is recognition of ICMS in those high level frameworks also. So that was sort of my view on various questions on alignments. We are trying to create a connected picture of all of this. So ICMS for us acts as a high level standard from the coalition. Alongside that, we have created an XML and JSON-based data standard, which is available on GitHub for any software vendor who wants to get the ICMS standard. Below that sits the cost prediction RICS professional statement. Alongside that is the whole life carbon assessment piece that's going to be released soon, the second edition, and simultaneously the built environment carbon database, which provides entity level and product level benchmarks. That's going to be released in October. Tying all of that together in UK, the detailed classification system that's used is NRM 1, 2, 3. So mapping all of this together will hopefully create a connected picture of cost and carbon. And then we provide several other pieces, as I shared with you earlier, training and other pieces that help give this RICS carbon toolkit, make it available to our members for implementation purposes. I think that's pretty much it. These are the pieces that I used in my presentation. You can scan these QR codes to download them. All the work that I described is freely available. It's open source. We are here to provide more information, but anyone can use, adopt, and implement that. So with that, I'm going to stop my presentation, stop sharing, and see if anyone has any questions or comments.
Thank you. I do apologise for being late. I had a Teams update just when we really don't need it. Trying to get in. Thanks so much, Anil. That's, I think, a terrific summary, and do hope that for the team here who has worked away and toiled away at all of the measurement and functional unit classification. I see Jackie's on the call. I'm sure she's feeling warm and fuzzy about all the efforts that you're going to progress the functional units. Really appreciate your time. I think there's already a couple of questions that we want to take. Did I see, Brendan, did you pop a chat message in there, or is there a question that we can have ask Anil? I have a question, but Finn, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. I don't know I was first saying I was. Anyway, there's a lot in that, and my head's partially spinning. But generally speaking, it looks awesome. Admittedly, I'm not really across ICMS historically. One thing I'm interested in is with the standards. And I hate to say it because I know the engineers and scientists don't want to talk about sort of marketing and sometimes the comms piece, but I'm interested what is underway to sort of communicate this out, because what we do often find, even when you've got the some awesome standard comes in that feels like it's actually really going to be a step change, we go into this sort of sometimes a battle of the standards, and it just feels like we lose years waiting to see which standard comes out on top. Not that I see a competitor to this. So the short question was, is there much going on to try and push this out into the markets and communicate it?
Yes, and I think a couple of points, but you raise a very important point. Technical standards give you the technical stuff, but if you don't tell the story of how it solves an industry problem, then really it remains a technical standard. So we're keenly aware of that. ICMS being a coalition, not-for-profit entity without any resources, the individual coalition members, so RICS does a lot of promotion. We are going to, as soon as our second edition WLCA is launched on September 19th, we are going to be promoting globally how these standards work together, how do they map. And I think AIQS, I don't know if anyone is there from AIQS, we really...
Anthony's here, I think. Anthony.
And they really helped build this standard. So Dave Picken, as I'm one of my favorite SSC members, because he could understand cricket as I can. So we had and really contributed huge into the standard building from 2015 up till I think last maybe November 2022. So he did a lot of good stuff, and that's how I think we can promote. If there is anything we can do, for example, if there are pieces missing, there are pieces that are not mapped, we are open to receiving that information. We run a LinkedIn user group. So it's an open LinkedIn group where people provide us input, we gather all that, and we keep updating. But it is an important point that you raise.
But I think a really important framing that you provided in your answer then, Anil, which Finn probably alluded to, is that from a technical perspective, there's a lot of focus on the measurement to very small levels of accuracy of materials, but it does miss the story, which is the most important thing, which is the user of that report from a commercial point of view. So I think the crucial part that ICMS plays is about bringing the practice into the reality of projects and to communicate that in a way that the actual final decision makers can align to economic decision making, because ultimately sustainability is outcomes from an economic, environmental and social point of view, and obviously more productive buildings are a really big social benefit for the planet and people. So I think that's sort of the crucial part.
Yeah, 100%. I'm just thinking of some local case study, local case study, possibly from all those countries that have been involved, because that's what happens. We get very parochial and we don't want to pull something from elsewhere. But as soon as you go, $1 billion project in Oz has done it, then you're like, oh, it must be good enough. So anyway, that was awesome.
We've been with our software footprint company and footprint calculator. We've been aligned with the ICMS for years, so it's like all our projects sort of are printed and published and aligned to that. So it does definitely help the articulation of it. I think that the other thing that would really be helpful is obviously the working group that Mel Rowan has been leading, the linear. I'm going to define it: linear infrastructure and other economic infrastructure. We have struggled very completely to work to get some understanding of what are the functional units for things like roads, and given that there are different road classifications, from a 4-lane motorway to a local road to dams, rail and stuff. So I'm curious to see how that has been advancing, and perhaps that's a key area that our crew could be collaborating with with the ICMS going forward into the future, so that can inform how do we progress measurement and benchmarking and reporting in that area.
Absolutely. So a couple of points I'd like to make means we have examples in Japanese, example projects in Chinese and Netherlands, UK, obviously, and so on. So building those case studies and examples are important also. And I think I'm quite keenly aware, Finn, of this idea of being national and sometimes international, and national doesn't work well. And I guess I'm sitting at a place where when Atlanta plays Chicago, we call it the World Series. So I think it's very important to keep pushing this message as well. So I see there are a couple of questions which I'm going to address, but to the point of functional units, I think ICMS probably does two main things which were missing in the market. ICMS for horizontal projects, linear projects, infra projects, civil engineering projects is the first reporting structure, framework, taxonomy that is available. For buildings, you still struggle because in the US you have master format and so on. But then within the infrastructure space, it really provides a very good reporting structure, which has now been copied or used in the WLCA, I should say, used in our second edition of WLCA. So reporting on infrastructure projects will be through ICMS structure. And ICMS also provides significant projects and attributes, which are sort of functional units. And if you look at those, and these are very detailed, built by global experts for each entity type. So if we have tunnels, then we went to tunneling experts and they help list what are the right functional units, attributes and values for that entity type. So that helps. Now, I think there was a question on biogenic carbon. One, it's reported separately, as you saw in the figure, it is separately reported in each module wherever it takes place. And secondly, within ICMS, there is no direct way of reporting or capturing that information other than we have a project attribute value common to all entities where you can report recycled, reused, end of life kind of information. Indirectly, we capture that there, but currently we do not have a direct way of capturing that. So that hopefully that answers that question, and I'm scrolling through Lucy's ICMS 3 reporting that's applied. Yes, so a project, you can report into the database multiple times. So project 1, you can report at early stages, and you can only report probably the categories. Then as design evolves, you can report project categories and then groups. And then as project evolves, obviously, when you have an engineer's estimate, detailed design, technical design, all that complete, you can report for the same project again at level 4. So that's how we work in terms of cost and carbon. Therefore, functional units will also evolve as we go. So initially, if you're doing early cost and carbon advice, for example, the BECD database is going to capture entity level benchmarks, which could probably be broken by categories. So construction, renewal, operation, maintenance, so that Chrome classification. But as design progresses, you can increase the sort of the detail in your discussion also. I hope that answers that question. Then ICMS aligned with current building software and data. Yes, even that. I spoke to EC3 this afternoon. That's been our July. My LinkedIn story in July was that finally ICMS is available in EC3. And ICMS is available in Autodesk Construction Cloud. Previously, ICMS was available in Costex, available in CostOS, and several other hexagons tool, and so on. So ICMS is built into those software because that's the way I think market adoption and implementation will take place. Okay,
we can take a question from Anthony. Although maybe he's
Hi.
frozen. Oh,
Can
no.
you hear me
Anthony?
now? Hey, well, thank you very much for the presentation. It's great everyone to be across ICMS, which obviously AIQS is also deeply invested into ICMS. I just wanted to draw it down to a Australian focus for the people on the call. So AIQS promotes ICMS. We also map our codes through our Australian Cost Management Manual, elemental codes to ICMS for a reporting perspective. And also just wanted to highlight that ICMS is a reporting. It doesn't actually doesn't purport to describe how costs are calculated. So to that end, we're developing our standard method of embodied carbon measurement. So that will just detail how quantities are to measure it in Australia. But we still, at a top level, align our elemental codes through to ICMS, and we'll continue on that journey.
Thanks, Anthony.
We may.
There are some other questions.
Just on that, Anthony, is it possible for you to share that method that you're developing?
Yeah, absolutely. When we're at we've still got a working group. Simon Squire is chairing that. So
Yes, and
absolutely
Simon
happy
is
to
helping a lot. He's part of our trustee group. So ICMS
Yeah.
has two levels, but we have the board or the trustee level, where Simon sits and participates with our trustees. And the trustees then have this standard setting committee, the technical, the nerdy folks like me who then help build the standard.
Yes, absolutely. I'll be chatting to Simon tomorrow actually. So we'll make sure that we see a copy as we work through.
Okay. David?
Dave?
Hi there. Just had a question. I guess one of the predominant industry standards in Australia is the Infrastructure Sustainability Council, and in the life cycle assessment process or methodology, it's I guess scenario comparison, like BAU versus your performance case and improvement, and often the performance case improvement is reliant on material substitutes. So it might be a high blended mix, fly ash, slag, concrete mix. So I can see the benefit of the ICMS as a benchmark. Say if you use the project level and you had a tunnel, 12 meter diameter tunnel, so many kilometers, you could use the project level per kilometer carbon calculation, but you'd need to know what the predominant material makeup was to really understand, is that a BAU, and then for us to do a performance with I guess performance scenario with the material substitutes, we'd have to break it down at the functional unit level and take into account a high blend concrete mix, etc. And then the same would go for asphalt for roads and the like. So I guess my concern is understanding the transparency behind some of those higher level cost/carbon assumptions.
Yeah, so I'm going to just pull up something that's similar, but maybe not exactly what you're saying. This is the Canadian standard for embodied carbon that was released in December 2022. So I'm doing it in Excel. We basically have our ICMS codes, ICMS level descriptions, and this is the BAU case, the baseline greenhouse gas emissions for a particular concrete mix type using industry EPDs. And this is the sort of, you picked a better mix, as you were saying, and the GWP for that EPD, GHG emissions, and percentage savings. So ICMS, so the Canadian government in December 2022 released this standard embodied carbon, which currently applies to projects above $5 million. Maybe $10 million. In 2024, it goes down to $5 million. And if they're going to collect hundreds of projects, hypothetically, and it applies to new and existing assets, If we had the coding structure, then you can start building your benchmarks, and the benchmarks continue to improve as we get more and more data. So that's an example of what you were saying, sort of, and what we are doing. And we're trying to replicate this in EC3. So it's called the Appendix B of the Canadian standard. If we can get this report or result directly out of EC3, then life is easier, because EC3 is a freely available tool. So
That's
I
great.
hope that answers your question.
And is the Canadian government setting the benchmark or baseline for some of those, like for concrete being, you know, a certain carbon per kilograms? Are they setting that?
They're using a carbon cost approach to sort of across multiple materials. You can apply that and see how much improvement you're making.
That's great. Thank you.
We've probably just got time for one last question, if there's something to discuss in the last moments. Murphy. Oh, sorry, Owen.
There's a couple that have come up.
Just a quick one, Anil. A few of your slides had A0, I think it was acquisition related carbon. What is that exactly? I haven't really seen much of that. Can you give me a practical example?
So if you look at the ISO standards, it's A0 module, which is R in ICMS acquisition. A0 for buildings is negligible, as the ISO standards say. So it's typically not even, you don't bother with building projects. But for infrastructure projects, any owner-related activity that happens pre-project level, where site acquisition, land acquisition, or any other preparatory work, like Infrastructure Ontario that we work with, would have something even before a project is really on the drawing board. Those kinds of emissions are counted in A0. The ISO standard gives a clear definition of what that is. I can't recall, but you can see it. And if you want, I can share it with you. What we say is anything related to land acquisition, any emissions related to getting the land ready for a large horizontal project.
Terrific.
Okay. Caroline, do you want to give some closing notes and we'll get everyone offline by 10 o'clock?
So yes, WLCA will require A0 reporting for infra projects, not for building projects.
Awesome. Anil, I feel like that's been extraordinarily valuable for our team and our crew, with the work that we do, the work that we've done, and the roadmap of where we want to go into the future, and hopefully some further collaboration with the terrific work that you have been pioneering there. Really appreciate the opportunity to meet you and our whole team. Really appreciate your time, and I express everybody's thanks in terms of really providing a very clear and considered and articulate presentation to us here today. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And I'm sure if there's any further questions, then we can collect them all together and send them over, and look forward to further collaboration.
Thank you very much for the invite. I really appreciate it. And we are working also with Transport for New South Wales, and they are helping us look at the infrastructure reporting structure and so on. Early days, but a good interaction there as well. Just dropping my email if anyone needs more information on WLCA or ICMS. Join the LinkedIn user group also of ICMS if you want more information. So once again, thank you for the invite.